Hello everyone, thank you so much for joining me today. I hope you are doing all well. So before we start, I thought that I kind of learned my lesson after the last live stream. So if you want to ask a question or if you want me to read your comment, if your comment is directed to me, can you please highlight my name? Because otherwise I'm getting kind of confused, as sometimes there are some discussions going on and I don't know if the question is towards me or to someone else. So that's just about the logistics. So I thought we're gonna start by kind of brainstorming the idea of why validation is important. So as you can see in the comment section, I asked that question just before we started. Why the validation is important? Why do we maybe feel like we need validation, right? Because I think validation is quite an important subject, and in a way, I think it reflects our need for something, right? So we know that validation in a general sense is this idea of getting a confirmation that whatever we do is right, or whoever we are is right. So obviously it's quite important, because when we are working on something, when we are on this path of development, we want that confirmation, right? Are we doing the right thing? Are we going towards the right direction? Are we developing in the right direction, right? So but the question is, how do we get that confirmation? Because there are many different ways to get that confirmation. But I think there's much more than simple confirmation of our behavior or of our path. So that's hence my question of why do you think the validation is important and what's the purpose of validation? So I've been getting some comments helping with self-worth, helping with self-esteem. So you see this connection that when we receive that validation, we experience pleasant emotions, right? We feel good about ourselves. We probably, our self-worth is going higher because we feel like whatever we are doing or whoever we are as a person is valuable. Kevin says one of the worst things you can do is to trivialize someone because you would rather not see their feelings. Right, so here we kind of see the negative side of validation, or rather invalidation. So what happens when we invalidate something within us or within another person? The purpose of validation, Fata Morgana says, to securize our environment. So you see here is all about kind of this validation. It seems to be somewhat not only about the confirmation, but also about kind of getting grounded, getting more firm within ourselves. And also, obviously, the validation can go towards other people. So we validate other people, right? We recognize them, we accept them, we validate them, their feelings, for example, or who they are as a person. So essentially, on this phenomenological level, it's this act of recognition and confirmation. So when we see a person who goes through some experiences, right? When we recognize it, we can connect with that person on this more intimate level, perhaps, because we validate it. Contrary to that, we might say, like, let's say we see someone crying, right? And we say like, you have nothing to cry about. That's super invalidating. So that's in terms of kind of providing validation. But what about validation towards ourselves, right? So obviously we can get the validation from other people, as I've just described, because it's this fundamental part of the dynamic between human beings. But also there's this act of self-validation. And I think that's one of the most important subjects I would like to talk about today, because this self-validation is about our own relationship with ourselves. So when we accept ourselves, when we accept different parts of ourselves, and this self-validation or validation of ourselves, obviously, as I said, it could come from self-validation, but also it could come from other people, right? So when we express ourselves, we want to be seen, we want to be recognized, we want to get that confirmation that our experience is right in a way, whatever that means, right? Because we could have different standards for what right behavior means or what the right personality means. But then who decides that? So there's some criteria for that validation. which I'm gonna go into later when we get to the last part of how to work on that self-validation. But this process of validation is not, it always involves other people, or it always involves our environment. It's not just about us. Like, of course, there's this part of self-validation and self-acceptance and embracing ourselves, but the validation fundamentally occurs within the dynamic with other people. So we need other people, in a sense, for that process to validation to occur, in a way. It doesn't mean that we have to be dependent on other people. Of course, I'm going to talk about it as well, because there's this negative side to this process of validation. But most importantly, I think validation occurs in this gap, or in this dynamic, in this relationship between ourselves and our environment. So it could be one person, it could be people, it could be society, or it could be whole universe, right? However far you want to go with this idea. ETI says, validation is positive feedback of our worth when we are dependent, especially when young. It is key. Right, so it's a feedback, right? Validation is like a feedback that we are getting in terms of what sort of actions, or rather what sort of consequences our actions might have on other people, what sort of consequences there are for how we treat other people, and of course how we treat ourselves. Validation encourages heading in a specific direction, Yanis says. Right, so again, we're going back to this element of confirmation. But as I was saying, that there's this, we could break down basically, if we take this subjective perspective on validation, we could break down the validation into this self-validation. So basically, self-acceptance and recognizing ourselves, and, offering ourselves this comfort of confirming, right, that we are on the right path, for example, or whatever we are doing is right, or that our personality is right? Whatever that word means, whatever our criteria are. But also there's the second part, which is external validation. So our personality doesn't, it doesn't end within our bodies, but on this phenomenological level, we kind of stretch onto the environment. So this external validation is this feedback, as someone says, ETI said, this feedback that we receive from the environment, that whatever we do might be right or wrong. So in terms of this split between self-validation and external validation, I think it's something important to keep in mind, because it kind of reflects this interdependence of ourselves on the environment. And it's not like, as I was saying, it's not just about specific person, although it could be, but it could be world in general, could be the universe itself, right? So what sort of consequences of our actions there are. But on a more intimate level, for example, this validation is a little bit like, could be a little bit like recognition of yourself in other people. So in a way it ties into empathy, because when you express yourself, right, there's this desire to be seen, to be recognized, right, to have our experience validated. But essentially this word validated means simply to be recognized and to be seen by another human being. So when someone recognizes us, when someone understands us, right, when someone sees or even experiences through empathy what we are going through, that's essentially a process of validation. So I would imagine that there are some negative connotations regarding the validation, where it's associated to some extent with like narcissism or being egocentric, where we want approval or we want kind of appreciation for who we are or what we are doing. But it doesn't necessarily need to be validation, right? Because on the fundamental level, on this very basic, simple level, validation is simply being seen and understood, where we recognize ourselves in the other human being, right? Because we can relate to their experiences and they can relate to our experiences, and that's how we connect on this adult level and mature level. But on the other hand, there's this shadow of validation where it's never enough, where we never feel satisfied, where we strive constantly for validation, for approval, for appreciation and adoration of other people, for example, where we want only positive feedback, right? That is this, I think that is this shadow of validation where we can't accept ourselves, perhaps, can't fully validate ourselves. And that's kind of creating this dependence on the environment where we constantly strive for the positive feedback, for the validation and appreciation and adoration, maybe even of our actions, but we never get satisfied. So this is kind of, I think this example kind of illustrates this process of where the validation is going wrong in a way. And I think that's one of the obstacles I'm going to talk about to why we might, feel unsatisfied need for validation. Nathan says, I would say that validating is very valuable if used for the right reasons. Or wanting somebody to listen, Fata Morgana says. So, right, so validation is very valuable if used for the right reasons. So as I was saying, right, so there is a fundamental need. We all want to be recognized. We all want to be seen, right? It's a fundamental emotional need that we want to kind of actualize ourselves in this world, whatever that means. But at the same time, it doesn't equal that we want to receive only positive feedback or only admiration or only appreciation, right? And that's usually what's connected with this idea maybe of narcissism a little bit, where we, constantly strive towards validation, but we never receive it. It's never enough. And also that validation has to be positive, otherwise it's wrong. So also I think another idea about this shadow process of validation and this possibility where the validation could go wrong is where we validate or strive to validate or seek to validate the wrong part of ourselves. So it's kind of tough to describe, because on the one side we want to validate all parts of ourselves, right? I think that's ideal because we want to gain that awareness and we want to feel recognized and seen in a sense. But at the same time, what if we strive to validate, for example, our defenses or our resistance to life or our kind of false self or maybe negative habits, right? Is that still positive form of validation? Because, for example, if I'm a compulsive liar, let's say, right? And then I look for validation from other people that, for example, I tell them that, I have really good reasons for lying to people, right? Is it really still a positive form of validation? Because in this way, we want validation for having a good reason for lying, whereas in fact, the act of lying prevents us from growing or being authentic and connecting with other people. So in this kind of scenarios, validation can go really wrong, where we validate the wrong parts of ourselves. Being okay is not good enough. We need to strive for greatness and becoming the best version of ourselves. Right, that is a tough one, because how do you define greatness and how do you define okay? Because, for example, when you strive to be the best version of yourself, that is okay enough, right? And also, if you flip it around, if you kind of want to change or want to become more, you first need to accept that things are okay. You first need to embrace all these different parts of you that might not be okay as well. So I think we kind of started formulating this goal or this idea that ideally we want to have 50%. Put it another way, there is a validation that we can provide ourselves, and there is an external validation. So we could say that in ideal scenario, we can do 50% of work in terms of getting that validation and meeting this need for validation that we all have, right? Because we can provide this self-validation. But the other 50% will be based on the feedback that we receive from the environment. So that could come from other people, that could simply come from what we do in the external world, right? Our career, or achievements, or relationships simply. So we could say that personally we are responsible, I think, at least 50% by providing ourselves this self-validation. But that's really hard, right? And we know that very often we might encounter all these different obstacles in the external world where we don't receive the feedback that we want, that we desire, or we receive too much of the same positive or negative feedback whilst not validating different parts of ourselves that are maybe more shy or more hidden in a sense. And also I think the major obstacle for not having our need for validation met is the fact that we cannot provide ourselves this self-validation. So what happens is that we constantly strive for the feedback in the external world, in other people. We want to be seen, we want to be recognized, but that never reaches our core, our true self, or simply core of our personality in a way. Because if we can't validate ourselves, if we can't accept, if we can't feel that satisfaction from meeting our simple need for validation, then no matter what people say, it's never going to be enough. So we're going to be constantly on this loop of striving towards feedback, striving towards appreciation, striving towards other people liking us, or other people admiring us, or paying attention to us, right? The attention is a big thing. But if we cannot provide ourselves this validation, we'll never be satisfied. We'll be constantly on this loop. So I think that in order to meet this need for validation, it all starts with validating ourselves first. And only then we can appreciate the feedback that we receive from other people. So it's a little bit like building a strong foundation within yourself first. So once you learn how to validate yourself in a healthy way, right? What you receive in the external world is a little bit like a little extra, a little bonus that you're getting from other people, from the environment. And also this feedback can then help you grow, because validation is not only the positive feedback. Validation is not only about other people making you feel important, or other people providing you with compliments or simply attention, but I think an important part of validation is also receiving this negative feedback. So negative validation in a way that is not rejecting of yourself. So it's not invalidation where somebody completely misunderstands you or rejects you, or rejects different parts of a personality. But negative feedback in the form of, for example, criticism or failures. Failures are super important in terms of learning about ourselves and learning how to grow and move forward in life, in a sense, or achieving different things. So having this realistic idea about what validation is, I think it's for some people it might be like a disillusionment, because you expect that other people will always like you, or you want other people to always like you or give you this approval. But the reality is that even the negative feedback can be validating, because then you can learn from it. So let me just read some comments. think in society, the biggest issue we have right now is telling people you are great just the way you are, which is the most damaging lie that turns people depressed when they realize they are not great. Right, so eccentric person says, so basically so it kind of ties into having an unrealistic idea about ourselves in a sense, or receiving validation for the wrong parts of ourselves. Because on the one side, you really need to accept yourself, right? But as I was talking in previous live stream on the self-acceptance, it's not about getting lazy and accepting it and just living with yourself, right? And being happy about it, right? But it's more to do with honesty and seeing yourself in an accurate way. So again, if the validation or the feedback you receive from the environment is not accurate, because there's this social idea that we are all great, like that person says, there's gonna be like a conflict between who you are as a person, right, and who you think you are. So this is actually quite an important idea, because it tells us that the feedback, or simply on the cognitive level, the thoughts that you're having about yourself, the ideas that you are having, or simply the self-concept you hold about yourself, it has to match their reality, so who you really are, right? If, for example, you're not really good at playing piano, but everyone tells you that you're really good, you're a really good player, that's gonna create a huge conflict, because on the one side, you probably, some part of you will see that you're not really good player, but then on the other side, other people are telling you that you are a great player. So that creates a huge conflict, and it's very confusing, and yes, it can lead to depression. So it kind of ties in, we're going back again to this idea that you need to do 50% of validation yourself, at least 50%. So you need to be able to, for yourself, develop an accurate self-perception, an accurate kind of standards or metrics for maybe evaluating your actions or evaluating your behaviors. So you need to choose your own values and your own perspective on what is right and what is wrong. So it kind of ties in a sense to this idea of having your own inner compass, moral compass, that determines what is right or what is wrong, or how to evaluate your actions, right? Because if you don't have this 50%, if you don't have this self-validation, and you are solely dependent on other people, that's not, it's just not a very reliable way. Why? Because every single person has their own values, has their own moral compass, has their own idea of what is right and what is wrong. So for example, if you ask 10 different people about whether some part of your personality is right or wrong, you're going to get 10 different ideas, 10 different perspectives. That's why this dependence on the environment for validation is just not very accurate. It's never going to be 100% accurate feedback. So you need to be able to determine that the standards and these metrics for yourself, right? So you need to be able to validate your behavior first before you can even consider validation of other people, the feedback of other people. And yes, in many situations it's going to be accurate, but in many situations it's not going to be accurate. As we were saying about this idea of, maybe reinforcing this positive ideas about ourselves in our society, like, oh yeah, you are great, you are fantastic, which is fine. It makes us feel good for a while, right? That is this danger of validation that can be in a way addictive, because it gives us this rush of satisfaction, but it's temporary, especially if we don't have this strong foundation of self-validation. So as I was saying on the beginning of this live stream, if you don't have self-validation and you are dependent only on the external feedback, you will get lost. You'll probably get lost in a way. And also, being dependent in such a way on opinions of other people and validation that's coming from other people, it makes you very unstable as well. Because as I was saying, each person has different metrics, different ideas, different perspective, different opinions on everything, right? So if you're dependent on other people, it's like being swung, it's kind of keep swinging between different perspectives, different self-concepts. And then who are you, right? That's how many people end up, especially like people who might be struggling with narcissists, right? They don't have this self-validation in the first place. So like there's no solid self-concept because they're solely dependent on other people. Thank you so much, Trement. Means a lot. Just read some comments. Dominic, it sounds like the quickest way to discover and experience self-validation is being genuine towards yourself, regardless if it's criticism or praise. That validation is acceptance of the current state of your being. Right, so it ties into this idea, as I was talking on the self-acceptance in the previous live stream, being honest with yourself. So it's not like, I'm gonna kind of repeat myself, it's not like being lazy or having some really bad habit and then validating it and saying to yourself that it's okay to be that way, regardless of the negative consequences it leads to. But it's more about recognizing and like, okay, I'm having this habit. This is what's gonna happen if I'm not gonna change, right? Okay, that's how I treat other people, right? It's all about being honest with yourself. So this dependence on other people, whilst not having strong foundation for self-validation, will prevent us from being satisfied, for satisfying our needs for validation. I'm losing my voice again, damn. But then, in order to get that self-validation, or validation in general, we need to build that self-validation. So being able to accept ourselves. And I think this inner criticism or rejecting ourselves or, trying to be someone else to get validation or positive feedback from the environment, it could be super damaging to meeting this need for validation, because then we are not connecting with ourselves, right? And if we are not connecting with ourselves, we cannot validate ourselves. We cannot accept different parts of ourselves, right? That's a first step, and that's the first obstacle to not getting that need for validation met. And then if you don't have this foundation of self-validation, again, it creates the dependence on other people. But furthermore, if you're not fully connected with yourself, if you're not validating yourself, and if you're not honest with yourself as much as you can, and it doesn't have to be 100% because we are just humans, but if you're not fully honest, you cannot be authentic with other people. And if you cannot be authentic with other people because you are rejecting different parts of you, right? Because you are embarrassed, because you are shy, because maybe you have some complexes based on your past experiences. If you can't make that connection with other people, that further is going to create some problems, because then other people will not be able to validate the authentic parts of you, right? So it kind of goes back again to this idea of authenticity and being honest with yourself. Because only then when you are honest with yourself, then you can be honest and authentic with other people. And then that's a win, because when you're honest with yourself and you accept yourself and you validate yourself, all the parts, different parts, and who you are as a person, that's 50%. And then if you're authentic, right, then other people can see you, can recognize you. And then you get the feedback from the environment of who you are as a person. And that's another 50%. And there you go, that's 100% of meeting your need for validation. Then I know that sounds super simple, but it's not always easy in practice, I guess, because we don't want to accept different parts of ourselves, right? We might feel shame, we might be embarrassed of certain parts of ourselves. We want to change, we want to be someone else. And then if we had some bad experiences in the past which invalidated the authentic parts of ourselves, for example, our kind of core of our personality, that probably gonna create further obstacles to getting that validation, because then we might have learned to invalidate the right parts of ourselves, the authentic parts of ourselves. So as we can see here, it all comes down again to self-acceptance, authenticity, and being honest with ourselves. So it always starts within us. So before we can go around and strive for external validation, which wouldn't be needed if we had the self-validation in the first place. But let's say someone wants more than 100%, right? They don't need just self-validation and don't need just a little bit of validation from the environment, but let's say their needs for validation are great. Before they can do it, they need to validate themselves. So it always starts from ourselves. Because if you don't validate yourself, if you don't accept yourself, and then you receive a positive feedback from other people, let's say you receive a compliment, or you receive some criticism of your work, constructive criticism of your work, or you receive simply some recognition, it's gonna kind of pass through you because you are not validating it yourself. So it's a little bit like having a void or emptiness within you if you don't have that self-validation. So whatever you receive, it's like going into this black hole and disappears, poof, right? So it's like it will never meet your needs fully if you don't have that foundation. So I think it's getting kind of obvious in terms of what we need to do to strive towards that validation. But I was wondering if you'd like to share if there are maybe any other obstacles to receiving that validation, or let me rephrase that. Do you think there are any obstacles, or have you ever experienced any other obstacles to feeling validated? And it doesn't mean it has to be in terms of self-validation, but could be validation from other people. So do you think there are any other obstacles to feeling validated? Or have you ever experienced any obstacles, or have you ever struggled with feeling validated, and what was it like? So brainstorm the obstacles a little bit more. Sorry, Trevin, but I can't understand a thing that you wrote. Which language was it? It looks like some Scandinavian to me. So, sorry, but I can't understand it. If you could translate it to English or Polish, I can understand it then. Yanni says, please talk about how validation intersects with gaslighting. Right, so someone who doesn't have the strong foundation for self-validation, that person will be very susceptible to gaslighting in the first place, because if they can't trust themselves, if they don't believe in themselves, right, then they are completely dependent on the feedback from other people. So then what happens is that you can manipulate someone's perception like this. So that kind of, you know, I don't mean to scare you, but like this lack of self-validation, it puts you in a very vulnerable position to being manipulated in the first place, because then you're completely dependent on other people and the feedback from the environment. So in a way, yes. So I don't think I can add anything more to that. So gaslighting, if you're not sure what that is, gaslighting is basically twisting facts, and it's an act of manipulation basically. So you feed the person with confusing details about what happened, and it's very invalidating, right? So there's this other side of this experience. It's very invalidating because you invalidate that person's experience or understanding of what happened. So what happens is that if that person that is being gaslighted, if they don't have that much self-validation, if they can't trust themselves, they're going to be very susceptible to this form. So if we flip it, if you're able to validate yourself, if you're strong in terms of validating your experiences, if you have, you know, strong values that you've chosen for yourself, if you have strong kind of moral compass of in terms of what is right, what is wrong, and it has to be yours. It cannot be someone else. It cannot be society's moral compass. It could be, but you have to choose it for yourself. If you have all that, then you're like immune to manipulation. Maybe not immune, but like, let's say 99%. If you're insecure, you value others' opinions too highly, right? AJ says. Exactly. So obstacles to not feeling validated, or what could prevent us from getting that validation. Kevin says, trusting the wrong person while you validate them, they invalidate you, right? Gaslighting. Dominic says, my validation issues typically stem from not knowing my audience. I'll express a position beyond the scope of my audience, then get a blank face response. I don't know what to do with it. Right, so the issue, so in this scenario, the issue could be that other people might simply not understand us, right? That's still feedback, because that tells us something, as Dominic says, that tells us something about ourselves, that maybe we're not fully aware of other people, or maybe we don't understand them fully. But it could feel invalidating when we are not being understood, where we, you know, throw our ideas out there, but it never reaches anyone. So another obstacle that we could add to our list, we have, you know, dependence on other people, self-rejection, but we could add this idea of maybe, how to put it, authentic self-expression, or maybe targeting, maybe being more aware of where we are targeting our ideas towards, because sometimes other people will misunderstand us. Sometimes other people will, you know, completely twist what we've been saying, right? So if we don't have this strong foundation of self-validation, it could be very traumatizing, maybe even. I know that for me years ago, if I felt misunderstood, that would be very kind of, you know, damaging to my self-esteem in a sense, because then I would blame myself that I'm not competent or qualified enough to communicate my ideas, or that my ideas are wrong. Whereas in fact, it's not always possible for another human being to understand you. That's the simple truth. It doesn't mean that we are wrong, that our ideas are wrong, but that simply in some situations other people might simply misunderstand us. So that's telling us something about ourselves, because then we can fix it, right? We can clarify our points. We can inquire into what has been misunderstood. It kind of builds in on this idea of interdependence and recognizing ourselves in other people, seeking ourselves in other people. So what did they understand in the first place? It seems there could be validation issues when you are interacting with people that have totally different morality systems. Right, so, you know, the more I read your comments, the more it becomes kind of clear how unreliable the validation from other people actually is, because everyone is so different. And of course, you will be getting valuable feedback from others, right? You will be getting some criticisms that will help you to improve and learn more, right? You will get some compliments, you know, approval in a sense, which, you know, might help you to feel more powerful, maybe, right? More affirmed that you are on the right path. But at the same time, you gotta question this feedback, right? You gotta run it through your own standards, right? Run it through simple logic of, paying attention to facts and what is happening and what that person actually meant, where they're coming from, right? And only then you have a choice to accept it or to reject it. So you don't always have to, take other people's opinions at face value that, it's totally true, it's more important than my opinion or my perspective. But you have to, there is some value in this, in their opinions, but it might be in, total BS at the same time. So that's something to consider as well, that whatever other people are telling us, it's not always, it doesn't have to be true. It doesn't have to be more powerful than our own perspective. And even in this live stream, right? Like, even whatever I'm saying, it's just my own perspective. So that's why I'm trying to ask, that's why I'm asking questions, and I'm trying to encourage this discussion to draw your perspectives as well, because your perspective will be much different than mine, for example. There might be overlaps, they might be completely different, but it doesn't mean that what I'm saying is 100% true, because you have to run it through your own system and critical thinking and through your own standards and, through your own ability to research things as well. So it seems like we all are in a way a little bit isolated from each other, because we all have this subjective point of view, subjective perspective, and we can choose our values, we can choose how to interpret what, we can choose our opinions and what we think about. But at the same time, it doesn't mean that our opinions and our perspective is the most important one or completely right either. So in a way, it's amazing, because there are 7-8 billion people in the world, and each person has different perspective, each person has different information. So that's why, for example, group work is very valuable, because you pull in all this different perspective, all these different people, right? And that's how we can brainstorm new things, because more people will have more information, more values to exchange. But it doesn't mean that each person is more important than the other. Validation as simple as kindness and respect is not so culture dependent but more universal. So for validation of one's being instead of idea, simple respect carries the day, I think. Right, that ETI says. Yeah, that is a good point, because it brings us to this simple idea I started this live stream with, where validation is a simple act of being recognized and being seen by another human being, right? So we can go into this abstract realm and opinions and values, but then on this very basic level, validation is simply being recognized and being seen, right? So kindness, positive feedback, positive kind of affirmation, right? Connection with the other human being, where we feel seen. Whereas when we shrug someone's off, when we ignore them, when we, stop paying attention to them, that's invalidating. That makes us feel invisible. It pushes us away, in a sense. It makes us question, are we really here? Is my experience valid? So it's complex, it's multidimensional, right? There's always this very basic grounded level in terms of validation, the one that I just described, that the ETI brought. And there's, and then we can get more and more complex, right? Because we have all this abstract realm, we have this choice of choosing our values and beliefs and opinions and perspectives. So lastly, we discussed all these obstacles to maybe not getting our need for validation met. I would also like to add to this list some possibly negative beliefs that we might be having about validation. I know that validation can be often associated, as I was saying before, can be associated with narcissism or egocentrism, or that we don't deserve to feel good about ourselves. So that's opposite end of the spectrum, kind of codependency in a way, where we don't feel that we deserve recognition, or that we deserve attention, or we don't deserve being seen, right? So we can go either way, right? And I think our beliefs about validation can also influence our ability to satisfy these needs, because if we feel guilty about feeling good about ourselves, or if we feel ashamed when other people give us attention, for example, right? That tells us something about these beliefs that we might be having to receiving, simple confirmation of our existence in a way, right? And that will prevent us also from validating our own experiences, because we don't deserve feeling good, for example. So kind of questioning our feelings or beliefs around this concept of validation, I think it's very, very important if we maybe want to stop being dependent on the validation from the environment. Maybe we want to improve our self-worth or confidence, or maybe we simply want to feel more free, right? Free from other people's opinions about ourselves, for example, or free to choose our own pathway in life, free from society in a way, or where we simply have this drive to actualize our true and authentic self. So questioning these feelings and ideas about validation itself could be super helpful, because I think that in some people there could be some negative beliefs that could be blocking them from receiving that satisfaction. So we have down quickly. So we have another 10-15 minutes left. So I think it's kind of clear on how to receive that validation, how to get that need for validation met. It's, as I was saying, it's a fundamental drive, it's a fundamental need for each human being. And as I was saying, it all starts from self-validation. So we need to be able to develop this criteria for ourselves. We need to be able to develop standards for ourselves. So how are we going to get that self-validation? How are we going to know that whatever we are doing is right? Okay, we could have different opinions about ourselves. And a particular example that comes to my mind is this inner critic that we might be having, right? So the critical voice that constantly evaluates our performance or punishes us for not meeting some ideal, right? I think it's very common internal dialogue that we might be having, and which might prevent us from validating ourselves, because then you might get stuck in a loop in a way where you do the right thing, whatever that right thing is, something that is directed towards your growth or well-being, but then the inner critic comes in and tells you that it's pointless, or that you are stupid, or that you can't really do anything, whatever that might be. So getting rid of that criticism could be super helpful, because if you're constantly punishing yourself, or if you have this constantly evaluating voice in the background, whether you're doing something right, whether you're doing something wrong, it's going to prevent you from accessing this level of validation. But then you might be asking, so how do I know whether I'm doing something right or wrong? You choose the standards, right? You choose it. You have to, it's not about, when you deviate from some standards, or when you deviate from some ideal you might be having about yourself, it's not about punishing yourself. It's not about criticizing yourself, right? And calling yourself names and making it very personal, that like it's all about you. But it's more about learning from that experience. So what happened, right? What could you do differently next time? What sort of things prevented you from doing the right thing, right? So you orient yourself towards growth, towards learning, right? And not taking things so personally. Like the inner critic it goes very personal. But in fact, when you make a mistake, when you do something wrong, it's very context dependent. So again, it goes back to this self-validation and, validating your potential for learning, for moving forward. And that kind of ties into being honest and authentic with ourselves. So to validate yourself, you need to know yourself first. So self-validation is about kind of maybe expanding your horizons, maybe expanding your perspective on who you are a little bit. Because when you have a bad habit and you don't accept it, you reject it, you push it away, right? Which is invalidating, which feels invalidating, because then each time you perform that behavior, for example, smoking or drinking, whatever that might be, you're gonna feel very guilty and ashamed and embarrassed, right? Very invalidating. So all this, following these feelings of shame or embarrassed, could tell you a lot about which parts you are rejecting, which parts you are invalidating. So acceptance of this part is not so much about punishing yourself, right? It's not about going along with this behavior either, but when you accept it, it's being totally honest with yourself. Why are you doing it? What sort of need are you trying to meet with the bad behavior? And this authenticity, right? So all these aspects we're talking in terms of this 50% of validation that we can get for ourselves, which is self-validation. But when we move that to the external world, right? When you're honest and authentic with yourself, then you will be honest and authentic with other people. And then what happens is that you connect with other people on this authentic level, which then leads to being recognized and seen. And that's essentially validation, right? It's not compliments, it's not receiving compliments. Although that might be a part of validation, it's not about, receiving constant attention or approval or someone telling you, yes, that's the right thing to do. But it's about connecting with other people on this authentic level. But in order to do that, you need to express authentic part of yourself. You need to be honest with yourself, and then you can be honest with other people. It doesn't matter. It doesn't mean that you have to share everything with everyone, because obviously you want to have some boundaries. But when you connect with other people, it's authentic, it's whole, it's present. It's not about gaining something, gaining validation, like look at me, look at this weird part of myself which I'm trying to hide or which I'm trying to get validated for. It's not all about this, but it's about simply being authentic with other people. It seems that being an authority in life cannot happen, but the closest authority in life we can experience is over our own life. What's correct varies from life to life. Dominic says exactly this, right? So we build this authority within ourselves, but at the same time, it's never complete. It's a work in progress as we learn more and more about ourselves. So self-expression, being authentic with other people, that's this external part of getting validation, which isn't about compliments, isn't about attention. It could be for some people. Maybe you have some huge needs for validation, right? We all have different needs. Some people are cool with eating 1-2 meals a day. Other people need 3-4 meals a day. Same goes with validation. As long as there is this foundation of self-validation, then we can go around and explore the world, because whatever we will get in the world will be satisfying to us, right? Will not be dependent on that validation. So self-expression, authentic, but having some boundaries if you want to. If you don't want to have boundaries, that's cool too. But I would recommend having some boundaries, because maybe other people are not comfortable with being so intimate, for example. So it's personal choice, I guess. And then lastly, I think in terms of this external validation, it's also about clear communication. I think it's a very important point. So expression of your true and authentic self, obviously it's about your presence, what sort of things you are sharing with other people, how you express your feelings, right? How you present your physical body, like what's your appearance like. But then communication is more about sharing your ideas and listening to other people, right? So empathy, but also asking for what you need and what you want. So clear communication, right? It kind of ties in again to this authentic self-expression, but with clear communication, that kind of gives shape to this authentic self-expression. So you're not pretending to be someone else, right? Your self-concept and who you are aligns. There's a congruence between these two aspects of who you are, right? That's authenticity, essentially. And then communication, or clear communication, gives shape to this whole experience, because then you can ask for what you need. Then you can ask for what you want, right? And then not only you can get your needs for validation met because you are expressing yourself. I don't think it always matters whether we can get yes answer from other people, but it's just a simple act of asking, right? It expresses itself, it expresses this authentic part of yourself. So clear communication, what do you mean, what do you want, what do you need, where are you going, right? What are you doing right now? Clear gives shape to this authentic self-expression. So I think that's pretty much it in terms of what I wanted to cover today. As usual, if you have any questions in regards to this subject, I'm here, right? So I'm gonna be here for another 2-3 minutes or so, maybe 5 minutes. So if you have any comments, any questions, feel free to ask them. If you have any questions unrelated to the subject of validation or self-validation, and kind of recognizing ourselves as, that we're okay and the other person is okay, which kind of, actually I forgot to talk about this aspect, which I'm okay, you're okay is a part of the book on transactional analysis, which describes different positions we can take in relation to other people. So I'm okay, you're okay is a healthy position. So where we validate ourselves and we validate the other person. 3 other positions include I'm not okay and you're not okay. So we invalidate everything, right? Next position is we say that I'm okay, but you're not okay. So we trust only about ourselves. We're closed down to learning. We don't want to listen to other people. And the last position, probably most common, especially in families where something traumatic might have happened, or where we struggle to make sense from our experiences, and where we say I'm not okay and you're okay. So this is extreme form of self-rejection, where we don't trust ourselves and we only trust other people. So if you want to read more about it, I'm not sure why I didn't talk about it. It's on my list, but I kind of skipped it. So yeah, if you're interested, transactional analysis, it describes a lot about this dynamics you can engage with other people, and I think I'm okay, you're okay, and this whole idea of taking these different positions and different roles is super important in understanding the concept of validation. So again, if you have any more questions on this subject before I go, you're welcome to ask me. And I hope, sorry, I just got distracted. And I hope for those of you who joined my Aspire coaching group, I will hope to see you all tomorrow at 6 p.m. UK time. Really looking forward. It's our first session. So if you're watching this, yes, we'll expand more on subjects like this in our group sessions. And as usual, if you are interested in coaching, my calendar is open. You can schedule free 20 minutes consultation. If you're not sure whether coaching is right for you, all you need to do is just go on my website, pick a date on a calendar, choose an option for free consultation, and we're set to go. Boundaries are a method of risk management. The less boundaries, the greater risk of damage or greater possibility of benefit, right? The thing is that there's always a risk with people, right? You never know what you're gonna get. Do you have any personally written works on validation that are publicly available or plan to in the future? Not really. I haven't been working on validation. Yeah, I haven't been really working on validation ever, I think. But in terms of validation, you know, as we broke down, there are different components. So self-acceptance, dealing with the critic, right? You can break it down into different components. How you relate to other people, right? And self-actualization. I think self-actualization is very relevant to getting validation, because with self-actualization, people who are on this path, who, you know, strive, who are very growth oriented, who want to grow, who want to develop, they are essentially validating themselves. So they choose their own values, they choose their own beliefs, their opinions. It's like they are dancing to their own music, right? Even if nobody hears it. So this kind of reflects this idea that choosing ourselves first, so validating ourselves first, trusting ourselves, but at the same time being open to other people's perspective and opinions, because that's how we can learn, right? We cannot know absolutely everything. We learn by listening to conflicting opinions, by disagreeing with someone, or if someone disagrees with us, or simply, you know, just hearing out opposite perspectives. That could be super helpful in our learning and growth. Thank you, Mamu. What if I be a hermit? No people, no problem? Yeah, you don't, like I was saying, like, you don't need other people to validate yourself. It all starts with self-validation. It's like 50% of work. If you're able to validate yourself, so, you know, you choose your values, you choose your beliefs, you choose what's right, what's wrong, you develop this moral compass. If you're able to learn from your mistakes, from failures, and you don't need other people to tell you that you made a mistake, you're already meeting your need for validation. And then, you know, to get more, to expand in the world, right? It's more like interdependence. We don't have to be dependent on other people to validate our experiences. If we do it for ourselves, if we know how to do it for ourselves, then, you know, other people, as I was saying before, it's like an extra bonus. And also other people provide us with an opportunity to learn. Knowing as much as you do about validation, how often do you struggle with it, if at all? Triment says. Well, it does come up in moments of where it feels like I'm doing something that's completely opposite to what other people are doing, or what they think is right. So it kind of comes in these moments of insecurity of, okay, am I on the right path, right? Other people might be telling me that whatever I'm doing is wrong, or, you know, they might give me some disapproval or disapproving look, for example. So, you know, it's gonna come out in these moments of insecurity. But then, you know, it's during this time I learn a lot about myself and about other people, because it's like this gap. So I'm not fully convinced that this feeling of insecurity. So I'm not fully convinced that I'm absolutely right, but like I'm kind of open to other people's perspectives, because what if they're right and I'm wrong, right? So in this gap, in these moments of insecurity, it's like a gap where we are able to learn, where I am able to learn, let's say, taking responsibility here. What has been your greatest moment in personal validation that you could share? I'm sorry, but I can't share any because I can't recollect any. Personal validation. Maybe seeing some results from my actions, that, you know, there's an effect of my work, for example, or that I've been developing in the right direction, I've been growing in the right direction. So kind of maybe looking at the outcomes of my action. That's the only thing I can think of, but I can't really think of any example. Okay, last question. Do you keep a dream diary? Yes and no. Yes, because I have it. No, because I'm inconsistent. So there are times when I write in it when the dream is very significant, but I can sometimes go for weeks or months without remembering any dreams. So then I'll forget about the dream diary, then I start remembering my dreams again, and it's very inconsistent. All right, guys. So I'm gonna be wrapping up. Thank you very much for joining me today. Again, if you're interested in coaching, I offer free consultation. You can book it on my website. Just select a date, and we are set to go. So basically, coaching is all about growth and development, where my role is to facilitate this process and help you to clarify your goals, help you to clarify your path forward, and support you in reaching the direction that you set for yourself. So if you're interested in that, or if you're kind of on the fence in terms of whether coaching is right for you, please either send me a message or simply go on my website and choose the right date for you on a calendar and book an appointment with you. So again, thank you very much for joining me today. For those of you who are in my coaching group tomorrow, I'm really looking forward to start working with you. And to the rest of you, I hope to see you in the next live stream. Thank you very much for watching. Take care, bye.